The drama we just saw, the song we just heard acknowledging that this world can be hard. I think most of us are familiar with what those expressions of art are talking about. Maybe like the drama, it's things like anxiety or careerism or family tensions that feel like it's choking the life out of us. Or maybe it's something totally unique to you that feels like it's choking your life. Either way, we don't exactly need a lecture to know that life can choke us out for all kinds of different reasons. In this world, in this room, there are hurting hearts. There are damaged relationships. There are flawed systems. People are treated poorly. Friends, family, they can betray us. But I also think if we were to practice some vulnerability together today, we don't have to look at the world around us to know that this isn't the way it's meant to be. We can look within us and know that's true. While we do hurt, we also know that we do hurt people. We do things we don't want to do. And there are things we want to do that we don't do. We aren't always as loving or kind or patient or gentle as we would like to be. There's brokenness in this world. There's brokenness in our relationships, and there's brokenness in our own heart. This is not the way it's meant to be. But what do we do about that? The video at the beginning of the service showed the story that we find ourselves in today. The world created from love, created for love. But then we, people, we've made choices that go against the grain of goodness. We've made choices that miss the mark, what the Bible calls sin. And the more we honestly grasp that reality, the more devastating Good Friday becomes. The more we grasp the reality of our choices, the more devastating this day becomes. But the more we grasp that reality, the more beautiful Good Friday becomes also. It's devastating because we recognize that we are complicit in Good Friday. But it's beautiful because we recognize we've been given an invitation to freedom because of Good Friday. John 19 tells us the story of the first Good Friday. It says this: "Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, 'Hail, King of the Jews!' And they slapped him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, 'Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him.' When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, 'Here is the man.' As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, 'Crucify! Crucify!' But Pilate answered, 'You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him.' The Jewish leaders insisted, 'We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God.' When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. 'Where do you come from?' he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. 'Do you refuse to speak to me?' Pilate said. 'Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" And Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." Let's make our way through the events of that first Good Friday together. John 19 starts by saying, "Then," which means it's predicated upon what had just happened. And what had just happened was Pilate declared to the people, "I find no basis to charge Jesus. He's innocent." Then he had him flogged. Jesus was beaten, his body bruised. A whip was made with metal or clay or bone shards on the end of it to destroy the skin and the back. Pure evil. Professional soldiers, professional executioners punished a man that their leader had just said was innocent. There's no basis for a charge against him. The opening scene. And then from there, things shift to pure mockery. We're told that the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe, and they went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And then they slapped him in the face. On your way in, you may have grabbed a thorn. Now, you don't have to do this. That's a disclaimer. But you can feel how sharp those thorns are. And now imagine a crown of them being jabbed into your skull by professional executioners. The agony packed into that one sentence is extreme. I've thought a lot about thorns leading up to today, because thorns are the object of grace that we're looking at. Thorns first appear in the Bible at the curse God gave when humanity first sinned. And you can see them throughout to talk about land being desolated. You can see Jesus talking about thorns, acknowledging in his parable that thorns choke out life, choke out faith, choke out vibrancy of soul. Paul has a thorn in his side that wouldn't leave. But I don't think I'd ever focus so much on the thorns of Good Friday. There are people who write entire essays on the one verse about thorns, dedicating years of their life to studying it. They study every single detail imaginable about those thorns. They study the agriculture of Jerusalem, the landscape, to know exactly what kinds of thorns were in that region. They study what kind of crowns would have been familiar. What would the crowns have looked like? What were the kinds of crowns on the royal coins that they might have been imagining it to look like, to make a crown from? And while there's all kinds of theories, there's basically two conclusions. And since our object today is thorns, I thought maybe I could spend a little bit of time sharing a bit more of the details. The dominant theory is that the thorns came from a date palm or an acacia tree, which means these thorns were up to 12 inches long. The crown on the coin of the day was called a radiate crown or a solar crown. And you can look it up later, but those kinds of crowns would go up, radiate towards the heavens, a sign of divinity. Thorns jabbed in up to a foot long, radiating as a mockery of his claims towards divinity. Or two, something like the Euphorbia malii shrub, often called the crown of thorns shrub, which would be like a vine with thorns like this one, and it would have been wrapped around the head over and over again. Either way, that crown of thorns was an utter mockery of him. And either way, independent of what kind of thorns it was, Jesus wasn't just suffering from the pain of a puncture wound. I spent some time reading medical journals this week on date palm poisoning, acacia tree thorn poisoning, Euphorbia malii puncture poisoning. Here's one quote from one medical journal. Date palm thorn injuries require a high level of clinical suspicion and careful management, as they can lead to severe complications such as tissue inflammation, synovitis, and extensive hematoma. Or if it was the crown of thorns shrub, the sap from that plant was corrosive to skin and could lead to blisters and blindness. And that's from one puncture. We're talking a crown of them into the skull. It wasn't just puncture wounds the thorns delivered to Jesus' body. He was beaten and flogged and whipped and punctured and injected with thorns on his way to the cross. The object of grace this week, thorns, was an object of horrific pain. And then they threw a royal robe on him. And they went up again and again and again to him, mocking the movement of approaching royalty, approaching him, your majesty, and then, hail, King of the Jews. And then the next professional executioner, hail, your majesty, King of the Jews. Over and over again and again and again. Beaten, bruised, bleeding, punctured, punched, and mocked. Good Friday. They bring Jesus out in public. Thorns injected, robe on, and when they saw him, they start yelling, crucify! Crucify! And Pilate's like, but he's innocent. There's no basis for a charge. So the Jewish leaders up the accusation. It's not just about a claim to being the King of the Jews anymore. Now they say, well, our law says because he's claimed to be the Son of God, he must die. And when Pilate heard that he was claiming to be the Son of God, we're told Pilate got even more afraid. And it says he took Jesus into private and he goes up to Jesus and he's like, where do you come from? Notice he doesn't ask, is it true? He doesn't ask, why are they saying this? He's like, where have you come from? Because for Pilate, as a Roman, it was entirely within his worldview and imagination that gods entered the human experience. His fear was, what have I done? Where have you entered the human story from? Where do you come from? And yet Jesus remains silent. He doesn't answer. Like, what composure? What confidence in God's plan? What stability of soul in surrender is on display from Jesus here? Like, Pilate is used to people's lives hanging in the balance before him, but he is not used to people being silent before him. And he says, don't you know your life hangs in the balance? I have the authority to save or squash your life. And Jesus responds, you only have what's been given to you. What composure, what confidence in God's plan. What stability of soul in surrender is on display from Jesus. These Good Friday events are horrible to imagine. But at no point as we read through what happened should we ever think that Jesus was out of control. One of the most staggering things Jesus said on his way to the cross came in John 10 when he said, "No one takes my life from me. No one's taking it from me. I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again." So while the Romans were the ones doing the mocking and the whipping and the punching, and the Jews were the ones shouting for crucifixion, while Pilate was doing the interrogation, at every single point, make no mistake, it was Jesus laying down his life, choosing to lay it down on his own volition and accord. Jesus chose to go all the way down to death, accepting the abuse, enduring the screams and the puncture of the thorns on his own accord, which led to the cross. The pain he had experienced up until that point was soon to be eclipsed by the pain of the cross. The sign above his head said, "King of the Jews." And there was anger that Jesus was claiming to be the Son of God. Jesus did not lay his life down, though, for a political kingdom. Jesus laid his life down because he knew the only way to break the brokenness of this world was to take it upon himself. The only way to free people from sin was to take the consequences of that sin upon himself. So he willingly went all the way down to the cross in surrender, as a sacrifice on his own accord. A perfect life surrendered and sacrificed and offered for the imperfect ones that he loved and loves so much. Jesus took the curse from Genesis that we deserved. Jesus took the consequences of sin on the whole for the world so that we may be freed. Because Jesus knew we couldn't save ourselves. We couldn't save ourselves. Earlier this week, I was doing what I do most evenings, which is wrestling with my kids after dinner before bedtime. It's a lot of fun. They're getting bigger, but right now I can still totally take them. Like totally. It's not even close. Not to brag, but easily. I was wrestling with them when Charlotte, my 7-year-old, she just comes running across the room and just jumps in the air and cannonballs on me. She jumped on me, so I bear hugged her and I wrapped her up. And she was in the throes of the battle, jumping right on top of me. And she just yells to her siblings, "Run away! Run away! I'll save myself." Spoiler alert, she couldn't save herself. But I had two realizations in this moment. One of them was, how often do I try to save myself? Like, I know I can't save myself from sin. I know I'm not perfect, but how often do I find myself in a mess and I'm just like, I'll save myself. Run away. For the last several weeks, I've been thinking about today. Because today is the anniversary of the day I gave my life to Jesus. I was at a church service, kind of like this one, kind of nothing like it. But Good Friday was the day I recognized I had made poor choices, that I had sinned, where I recognized the consequences for that, and that weight came to bear on my shoulders. And it was Good Friday where I realized I had jumped into a mess and made a mess, but that I couldn't save myself from it. And I realized that because of the second realization I had. And that is that Jesus jumped into the battle and said, "Be free." Jesus jumped into the battle so I could be saved. Jesus chose to descend all the way down to death so that I could be all the way saved and lifted out of death. Run away. Be free. I didn't have to say, "I'll save myself." And he did that for you too. Hebrews 12 said that Jesus endured the cross. He endured the shame of the cross. Why? We're told for the joy that was set before him. Think about that. The joy that was before him on the radar screen of his life while he was getting beaten and whipped and mocked and punctured and stabbed and killed. The thing before him that enabled him to endure the cross was the joy before him. And the joy set before him was obedience to the Father to set us free. We don't have to save ourselves. We have someone who willingly jumped into the battle for us. He took our punishment so we can have his reward. And so this Good Friday, may we reflect on that reality. We can't jump in and take the consequences of our sin and come out the other side unscathed. But praise God that Jesus has done it for us. Jesus has descended all the way down to death. I mentioned earlier, perhaps on the way in, you grabbed a thorn. As a close today, we want to take time to have an embodied response where we choose to respond, as we often do on Good Friday. So the band's gonna lead us in some songs. And if you would like to, here's the invitation. Would you grab your thorn? And we invite you to come up here and take your thorn and come to the cross and place your thorn in the cross as a way of acknowledging and recognizing that it's the thorns we deserve that Jesus received. The thorns Jesus took upon himself should have been our punctures, should have been our pain. And we want to recognize not only our participation, but our presence at that first Good Friday, placing our thorns in the cross, acknowledging both we placed them there, but also that Jesus took our thorns away from us. We don't have to hold them anymore. Isaiah 53 says, Jesus was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. And the peace we experience is because of the punishment he experienced. And it's by his wounds we are free. And so if you'd like, we've got a lot of time. I invite you to come up. Come up on this side. There's some thorns there. If you didn't grab one on the way in, come up this side. You can grab a thorn. Take a moment at the cross, place it in, acknowledge what Jesus has done, and leave your thorn there because you don't have to take it anymore. There's also a cross